Some of you have probably seen the psychopathic, Islamophobic, racist ramblings of Kellie-Jay, who was at the Unite the Kingdom march, which is essentially ironic considering that it's the probably most divisive, racist, Islamophobic protest, with no real understanding of history, with no understanding what's going on in real life, with no understanding the fact that, any kind of class understanding of society, how Tommy Robinson, Nigel Farage, they are bankrolled by millionaires and billionaires who simply want to keep the working class in order, keep them in, so that the working class don't have a real consciousness of what's really going on, the power imbalance between the haves and the have-nots, the super rich, the most powerful, the military industrial complex, the foreign policy advocates who are essentially Zionists. These people have no real understanding of what's going on. And you have grifters who I'm pretty much sure that these people are also bankrolled. If you don't know the network of these right-wing influencers, just look at Tim Pool. Look at a book released in America several years back, Dark Money. How these influencers that seemingly they make a career out of just talking crap, and you wonder where their money comes from, how they make a living, how they have to spend time on these career, on this kind of career, when they're really, they really shouldn't be in that position. Simply being able to speak, be able to talk into the camera, as I'm doing right now, doesn't necessarily pay the bills. In fact, I'm not making not a cent on what I'm doing right now, even though my videos are arguably, and I'm not saying this to boast, but they arguably have more intellectual content, more based in reality than these, dim-witted people who should be behind bars, or at least ostracized to the point where they should be, not, they shouldn't be brave enough to show their faces. And I say this as a free speech advocate. I mean, these people, yes, these people, in some way, they should be allowed to say what they think. But, society and media and politicians should get out and walk the walk. When they say they believe in equality of liberal Western Enlightenment principles, they should, in the same way that they're very happy to condemn, people who are wrongly condemn people who are, criticizing Israel. Why are they not criticizing people who are actually racist, people who are Islamophobic? Kellie-Jay said she wants Islam out of the classrooms, out of the public office. What does it mean? What is she trying to insinuate here? She's trying to insinuate that people of Islamic faith should not be allowed in public office. She's talking about Sadiq Khan. She's talking about people of different heritage, someone of a different background who she does not consider herself part of. This is also a very clear grifter, because she knows that the Reform Party is on a rise and it's an up and up. She knows that there is an increasing transphobic, this kind of her vehicle of grifting for the last decade was transphobia, and now she's trying to jump on this second bandwagon of Islamophobia. This person never spoke for women in any meaningful sense. She does not represent women. She does not represent the beliefs. She doesn't represent the fears of real, the everyday woman. She doesn't understand. She does not advocate for the rights to abortions, for example, the right to a fair trial against the pedophile class. She doesn't care about Jeffrey Epstein. So this is clearly somebody who's riding a wave of hostilities weaved by the mainstream news and media and politicians who are there simply to protect their elite class, but at the expense of a downtrodden, the oppressed class. And this is something that's been used time and time again. Just think about the edict of expulsion in the Middle Ages, where where Jews were just kicked out because the king couldn't afford taxes, and therefore he wanted to use the Jews as a scapegoat, as to appease the population, and simply, make them bear the brunt of the failures in the nation. Of course, this is a symptomatic of really bad, really poor politics. I mean, monarchies were already bad to begin with, but then you add to the mix a scapegoat, the other, into which you can apply all your failures onto. This is what's being utilized now by Reform Party. Now, you might be asking, I've said this in the past, I'm not Muslim. In fact, some of my family members, or rather distant family members, people who are, cousins of cousins, they may even show Islamophobic tendencies because of the history of what happened in India. My parents are from India, and we have a different religion to Islam, and even people of India, non-Muslims in India, they lean towards Islamophobia, and this is shown in the kind of the Hindu nationalism of India. But you might be asking, why do I care? Why do I care? Because in the end, I know it takes a just bit of going outside and touching the grass, talking to Muslim people who happen to be Muslims. People are born do not choose what ethnicity they're born into, what family they're born into, and often people take on the religion of their parents because it brings them a sense of community. It's not by choice, but it brings them a sense of community. And so all these people, Kellie-Jay, Tommy Robinson, if they're born in Muslim families and let's say they decided to leave the faith of Islam, they wouldn't be so vehemently racist towards Muslims, because they know that they are just simply human beings. Some of them more religious than others, some of them more liberal than others. Some of them want to leave the faith, and somehow they can't due to family concerns. Some people want to stay in the faith. Some people are new to the faith, like people like reverts. But they're essentially all just human beings. And if they were such an issue, then we would have a much bigger issue on our hands. The fact that we've got 2 billion Muslims on this planet, and yet the vast majority of violence is not committed by Muslims. It's committed by Western imperialists. Just look at the Iraq War. Just look at what the violence that Israel is committing on people of Palestine, of Gaza, or West Bank. In fact, if anything, and this might offend some of my Muslim comrades, Muslims might actually, some of them might be more materialistic than they want to purport themselves to be. Just look at the UAE, look at Saudi Arabia. They care more about their stability than speaking up about Palestine. They care more about the status quo than speaking up about Palestine. If anything, these people are more liberal-centric, more neoliberal, less about progression, less about radicalism, more about just keeping things stable and there's because human beings are rational creatures. There are I can understand why people would fear this or fear that, but the consensus amongst dim-witted racists, grifters like Kellie-Jay or Tommy Robinson, is that Islam is a threat to British way of life, and they can't really point to anything in particular. It's a cloud of racism. It's a cloud of racism that fogs their mind, fogs any kind of intellectual capacity to think. Because the moment you actually look at the details and you start, and you try to justify a generalized way of thinking about things, then you're essentially in the territory of racism. I mean, there is no other way to think about it. And this is reflected in our society, in our media. It's reflected in the way that BBC, for example, and the Labour Party, the politicians of today, it's reflected in how they report on media events. We just had a shooting on a mosque in America, not reported on BBC News. Now, this is something that, you know, obviously shootings happen all the time in America. But if it was a shooting of a synagogue, it would be plastered all over the media. If there was a mentally ill patient who ran out and attacked 3 people in order to literally end their lives, and 2 of those were Jews and 1 of them were Muslim, they wouldn't mention the Muslim man, because this is to create a narrative, weaving a narrative, and to simply conflate it with the pro-Palestinian movement or any kind of movement for justice as a way to smear the movement and to simply propagandize and manufacture consent to the population in order to crack down on protests, crack down on any kind of way of thinking clearly, succinctly, and humanitarian, in a humanitarian and universal way, without hypocrisy. We're living in a society of hypocrisy, and all these liberals who, you know, when I'm talking about liberals, I'm talking about these people who are progressive except Palestine, essentially. They're progressive except for the rights of Muslims. They're progressive except for the rights of the school children in Iran who are bombed. They're progressive except for the non-whites. They're progressive except for the trans community. And let's not get it twisted. People who are transphobic yesterday are the new anti-Palestinians today, because these people are psychopathic. They don't have any sense of morality. They ride the wave of discontent from people who literally have no power, and this foundation of ill will towards the so-called other is fermented by the Daily Mail, by the Times, by the media, by the BBC even, and it kind of creates a kind of an atmosphere of resentment and hatred towards the so-called other. And when we talk about the other, we talk about the powerless, oppressed groups of people who are simply wanting, who are simply at odds with the geopolitical interests of Israel, of the billionaire ruling class, of whatever, the centrist elites in Westminster, the Peter Mandelson, Tony Blair types. And it's all simply to punch down on minorities in order to gain power. And we must understand that. We must learn about what's going on. These useful idiots, Tommy Robinson, Kellie-Jay, Nigel Farage, these people do not actually target the issue at hand. These are just the Third Reichers in disguise, but they don't really have the intelligence that you expect for a takeover, but they are utilized by the media and the politicians, and the politicians and media run along with it. They smear and smear and smear the progressives to the point where people just simply vote for the centrists or even the Reform Party, because unfortunately the centrists capitulate to the right wing in order to take their votes. But nobody's going to vote for a diluted Reform Party when there is a real Reform Party. Why would you capitulate to them? Labour are simply saying that yes, the anti-immigrant rhetoric is fine, it's rational. Yes, the anti-Palestinian rhetoric is fine and rational. Yes, racism towards Muslims is fine and rational. When obviously they are spineless cowards. Keir Starmer, West Streeting, all these people are disgusting cowards. And I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, comment and subscribe. That'd be very much appreciated. Thank you.